Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to either day 6 or day 7 in palette week. I realized yesterday in what was actually day 5, I misspoke. I'm way out of sorts. I thought yesterday was day 6, alas, yesterday was day 5. And today hopefully will be day 6 if I can get this video edited and uploaded by tomorrow. Otherwise, you will have seen what would have been the finale, which is my palette declutter yesterday, and then today we're wrapping it up. But hopefully you're gonna see my palette declutter tomorrow, because today I have eyeshadow palettes in my collection that either throughout my declutter or throughout some of the videos that I've been filming through this palette week, I found myself saying, I don't feel like I could declutter this. Something along those lines. And so I thought that would make a really fun video concept. I actually was going to do ranking every palette that I know pan left behind this year. And as I started to put that together, I wanted to separate that. Like, I wanted to take out any new palette that came into my collection this year, because I will be ranking those at the end of the year. And I realized I don't have a ton of like non-new palettes, and I really just didn't have the energy to do a ranking. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna film this instead. I have 24 eyeshadow palettes that, as I was kind of looking throughout my palette collection, I was like, I literally don't feel like I could declutter that palette even if I wasn't using it that much. You'll find there's palettes throughout this video that there's a couple, for sure one unused palette this year that I still am like, I don't think I could declutter this. So that is what today's video is going to be. If you are interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit chatting about makeup, I'd love you'd consider subscribing before moving on. I am posting at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time throughout the month of December, so I hope you will join the chaos over here. Other than that, let's jump into the video. I have not used tretinoin in weeks. Something weird is happening. Something weird is happening to my skin. I swear I thought I was ready today, and then I looked and there was like what looked like a giant booger on my nose, but it was like possibly peeling skin. I have freaking no clue. And then my skin was just, I was not liking the way that my skin was looking. What is with this freaking hair? Or this stupid wing of all this broken hair wings. Should we just, okay. Something is also happening over here. And then I was trying to like powder my face to like fix my, I don't know. It's fine. We're moving on. We're just gonna film through it. We can do it. We can do it. Okay, there is just a scattered jumble of palettes in front of me right now. So this is going to be in absolutely no particular order whatsoever. And I didn't purposefully plan like, oh, we're in the year of 2024, 24 palettes for 2024. Normally I would do something like that, but it just so happened that it happened to be 24 eyeshadow palettes. So let's jump in, and we're gonna start with my Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette. To begin with, we all know Pat McGrath palettes are just very expensive. They retail for $128 before sales. Never buy a Pat McGrath palette like full price. Please just do not do it. She runs enough sales, like just wait for her to run a sale. This was my first ever Mothership palette, and I purchased this when I was like just starting to dip my toes in green eyeshadow. Like I was thinking, I was experimenting and thinking I liked it, but like I wasn't sure yet. You know, we were trying something new. We weren't sure if we liked it, but over time we found out that like it was our favorite thing ever, aside from like now blues. But you know what, it's fitting that I have this green eyeshadow one today. Anyway, I was wanting this palette. It was like, this was like the newest release at the time, and so it was like the new and exciting thing, but there was like this beautiful green eyeshadow, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think I like light green eyeshadow, so I definitely want to try this palette. Plus these two shadows, like the matte shadows in here, were more brown leaning, which I felt super comfortable using. And I will say I've used this gold quite a bit. You can see there's like a dip there. It's like a taupey gold. Really enjoy that. So the reason I don't feel like I could ever declutter this is because it was my first Pat McGrath palette. You know, it's like your first time. So you're always gonna have a memory of some kind of your first time. So there's that. And then I also really love this palette. I still wouldn't recommend this at full price. Still wait to get it on sale. But I love having this shade specifically. Anytime I feel like anytime I feel like a green look just isn't quite right, I will use this as a lid topper shade, and I love it so much. I would keep this palette for that shade alone, but I also really do love like the rest of the shimmer shadows in here. Even this red, I don't reach for reds that much, but I'm like, okay, I want to get into reds now. So like, I feel like this looks like a very beautiful red. Like I mentioned, I do really enjoy this like gold taupey shadow. And then I honestly even feel like this would make a really beautiful smoky eyeshadow. You can tell I've used some of that as well. So this Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette, I don't see myself ever being able to part ways with. There are 3 palettes that I went on to repurchase. 1 because mine was destroyed, or 2 because it was old. So I wanted to talk about those palettes as well. I have 3 of them, as I said. So I have the Rowen 1111 quad. I talk about the Rowen quads quite a bit. I love them. I think they're so unique. They're not going to be for everyone, but if you like a textured shadow and you don't mind playing with a cream shadow, these are so pretty. I love these for like day to day, because sometimes I feel like we have to scale it back a little bit for work. Like I don't feel like I can wear like this to work. Like I would feel a little bit weird, but I don't want to be like just having like a matte in my crease at work. Like that's not fun either. So I feel like this is something that really adds something unique to an everyday look and just makes me so happy. 1111 is my favorite. I love the cool tone pink shade here. Like I love the coolness of this eyeshadow palette. But if you like something more warm, I also really like Mood Forever. And I honestly feel like I could never declutter. Like I could work my way through these palettes, these quads, but I would repurchase. The Rowen 75 Degrees, which I have worked my way through this year, I won't repurchase because I just prefer the color story of Mood Forever and 1111, but both would repurchase if mine got too old or if I worked my way through the shadows. I can tell I'm just like, I don't know. I do have a video coming on the 21st of December about 10 years of grief, because my dad passed away 10 years ago to that day. And I can just tell this year more than any other years, like I just feel off. I can tell like my mental capacity just isn't what it is, because I can tell like I'm nitpicking even more than I feel like I normally do. But I'm like, I need to just let it go. Like why? I just like really don't like my hair today. Like, so we're gonna let it go. We're gonna let it go. I feel like my eyeshadow's just bothering me, but we're gonna let it go, Steph. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. The Mini Nude. The Mini Nude eyeshadow palette. My previous one of this, like it was so beaten up. Like shadow was crumbling everywhere, shooting everywhere. It was so beaten up. I had multiple pans, if I'm remembering correctly, and so eventually I just repurchased it. Like my other one was unsalvageable. Like this front covering was like cracking off, so I was like, I just need another one of these. I absolutely love this. Especially, I find myself reaching for this more in like the spring, summertime when I'm wanting more of like a warm brown matte look. Not matte, just a warm brown look. I think this is such an easy palette to reach for anytime I just don't want to think about the look that I'm creating. It's like I can close my eyes, just create a look with this, and it's going to be very similar to a lot of the looks. Like there's 5 shadows, so a lot of your looks are going to look similar, but I always feel so pretty when I wear this. I can go really bronzy with this, or I can use the shade, I think it's Sienna, yes, if I want like something that's a little bit green, which I think we've established. I like something a little bit green. So I absolutely love this. This is something that I would always want. Like I can already tell this one is also getting a little battered and beaten up. Would repurchase a 3rd time, I promise you. I love having that palette. And then the other palette that I've repurchased is the Tartelette in Bloom. So I had previously decluttered my first Tartelette in Bloom. This is like one of the first palettes that I bought when I was getting into makeup, when I first started my YouTube channel. I had the Tartelette in Bloom, which I really loved, but then, you know, it got old over time and I could tell the quality had declined. I had multiple pans in the palette. I felt like I was just over the palette. So I decluttered it. And I would always think about this palette. Like I'd always think about it. It is not my most, actually it is a very highly reached for palette. I believe I've reached for this over 50 times this year, but it's not the palette that I think of like to reach for when I'm like, ooh, I want to like have fun and play with makeup. This came traveling with me on every trip this year. And this is the palette I will reach into if I want to play around with like a single indie shadow, or maybe I want to reach for a specific like special NZ Rain shade out of one of the NZ Rain palettes, but I just want like a neutral like base matte, and then I just want to reach into like one shimmer or two shimmers. Smarty pants. Reach into that all the time. But this is just a very utilitarian palette for me. I like this because you can just follow the rows if you want to just create a full look. I like that we have like almost like a pinky red row, but it's not like a rosy red like Pat McGrath rosy red. Like it's, I like this bottom row. I like the middle row. Like I really like this palette for just like a basic B sort of palette. It's so perfect. And when this gets old eventually and I have to declutter this again, hopefully it's still around and I will repurchase. I actually saw that they released the Tarte in Bloom in like a mini 6-pan, which I honestly just like having this one, so I'm not gonna purchase that. I just will have the larger one, but I thought that was, you know, I would likely recommend the mini 6-pan if it's the same shades from that. Speaking of kind of a utilitarian style palette, or just another palette that I like to travel with, but it's kind of gotten the boot this year, and this is one of the palettes that had gone unused. I've made sure to use this since filming my unused palettes because I felt so much shame for not using this, but this is the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes palette. I love having this in my collection. I feel like as I have started to get more and more into indie shadows, there's other mainstream palettes that I've wanted to declutter or just don't feel like I need in my collection anymore, but I still do like to have those like solid palettes that I can go to create like the matte base that I'm looking for, and I feel like this is so perfect for that. What I enjoy about this palette is, one, I love that it's really nice and sleek, easy to travel with, but we have like neutral browns, we have warm browns, and then we have just like a couple of pops of something a little bit different, like kind of a grungy, yellowy sort of greeny, almost with like an olive undertone sort of matte shadow. We have a green, which we love. Like I just feel like this is such a perfect palette. This is another one that I feel like you kind of can just like do your makeup, you don't have to think about it, and you're gonna get a really pretty look. You can do something very basic and simple with this palette, but there are some like punchier metallics in here that you can use to really have like a more like in your face sort of look too. I feel like there's a lot of versatility in a palette that maybe doesn't necessarily look like it has a ton of versatility. I love this one. I also don't really know, like I haven't really seeked out Artist Couture recently. Like I don't really know don't feel like I hear anything about the brand. Like, is it still around? I honestly don't know. So for that reason, this is one that I would want to hold on to too, especially if I couldn't get it anymore, like couldn't replace it. Speaking of palettes, I have actually quite a few palettes that it's like you can't replace. So I want to go there next. Oh, a lot of these are like you can't replace. Okay, well, we're just gonna keep going in the order that these are sitting in front of me then. I have the Beaute Bar Basic Witch palette. This palette, even though I definitely fell a little bit more in love with the Poison Garden, I included the Basic Witch in today's video because I remember just my whole journey with this palette. I hadn't tried a ton of indie brands before purchasing this, and I remember I saw this launch and I thought the color story was so fun and so pretty, but it was like a $66 eyeshadow palette, and I was like, that just feels like so much for an indie brand that I haven't tried and I'm not familiar with. And then it sold out, and then there was a pre-order, and I was hemming and hawing and hemming and hawing, and I was like, nope, I don't need it. And then I vividly remember being like, actually I do really want this palette, but I was waiting until I got paid so I didn't have to like move money around to buy the palette. I was waiting until I got paid so I could use my fun money on my fun things rather than like, you know, dipping into my Taco Bell money. Anyway, I remember being like, okay, I'm gonna buy that when I get paid on Friday. Logged on Friday, sold out again, and I didn't think it was coming back. And then I remember they posted like on Instagram, they were like, who would want to order this if we brought it back for a limited pre-order? And I was like, me, I am there. And then it did come back, and I think you can still get this palette now. And this really made me fall head over heels in love with Beaute Bar. They are now one of my top favorite eyeshadow brands. I actually do have a code with them, which makes me really excited. And thank you guys so much. There have been so many people using my Beaute Bar code recently. Thank you. Ever, if you use any of my codes, you guys, it honestly, like, I get so excited. I'm like, someone actually like wanted to use my code. Like, it actually means so much. So really, really appreciate that. Never any pressure, but I always pressure you guys to use somebody's code to save money. I think this is so fun, and what I love about this is there's obviously a lot of color in here, but this is one of those palettes that I feel like I could use like this as a companion palette if I wanted to reach into, say, Incantation, which I really like to do like a warm brown matte look, and then use Incantation because it's this really beautiful shifty like orange to gold to green shadow. It's so pretty. This is such a, Beaute Bar makes such special shifty shadows. And you know, if Basic Witch isn't always around, like, I would be so sad not to have this color story. I just have so many fond memories of like everything to do with this palette. So that one I could never see myself parting ways with. I think you guys will also not be surprised to hear that I could never see myself decluttering the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. They've said they're bringing this back. I wish I had a code with Glaminatrix because I literally cannot shut up about this palette. This is my favorite palette in my entire collection. And yes, I have like some shadows like in Beaute Bar palettes, like, or Ensley Rain, like bright, fun, colorful sort of shadows that I love. But for just an all-encompassing palette, like something that this is something that I can create work appropriate looks with, but then I could also use this as like a going out palette. Not that I'm really going out, but if I was, like, I could see this, like I could just see myself like in college using this, like sitting at my roommate's like big mirror, getting ready, doing such a bold glam look. And by bold, I mean just like really punchy metallic. Ugh, so pretty. And I always talk about how I love the mattes in this palette because they are more buildable, which definitely works better for me because sometimes I can be pretty heavy-handed. And another reason this wouldn't go anywhere fast is I feel like people have been talking about this palette for a long time, and Glaminatrix has only recently said that they are going to be bringing it back, which I'll be curious if it's in a new formula or if it's the same formula. But like, if this ever went away and they didn't bring it back, like, I would be devastated not to be able to replace this. I love this. There's also so many different like directions you can take this. You have like neutral browns, you have a green in here, you have this shadow right down here, which can lean pretty gray, especially if you pair it with this shadow right here. You have like purpley, more purples, I was gonna say purpley pink, but purples, but you do have pink shimmers. So many different directions you can go with this palette. I absolutely love and adore this palette. Could never see myself parting ways with that. All right, another palette that has a lot of sentimental value to me, or just sentimentality to me, is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. This is my first large Huda Beauty palette. I had already I believe tried the Huda Obsessions palettes prior to purchasing this and really enjoyed the Obsessions palettes. But I remember this cost a lot of money, especially like at that time. I was used to spending maybe like $45 to $50 on ABH, and I want to say this was either $65 or $70, so definitely more expensive. And at that time especially, I always talked about how like I just like my life is always chaotic and I strive in chaos, and so I was really into like this thought of Mercury retrograde. Now I'm like, I'm way too old to want chaos in my life, but I was like, I always talked about how I felt like my life was in constant Mercury retrograde, which if you're unfamiliar, my understanding of Mercury retrograde is when Mercury is spinning in the opposite of direction of Earth, which doesn't happen at all times, but people like won't make business decisions during that time because it's thought to be like a more chaotic time, etc., etc. Anyway, that's everything that I have to say about what Mercury retrograde is. Clearly I've used a lot, like I've used this palette a lot. I remember when this first came into my collection, I was reaching for this constantly. Now it's not really a color story that I find myself gravitating towards, but I will still say there's some shadows in here, especially the shimmers, that I still really think are beautiful. Supernova, Gold Glitch, Galaxy. I'm so close to a pan on Nebula. I really want to hit a pan on Nebula. This is just a palette that I feel like would be one of those that even when I stop using it altogether, I wouldn't want to declutter it just because I have just so many like memories of my first couple years on YouTube and just really loving this palette. So kind of in similar vein to that, I have the Natasha Denona Lila palette. This was my first Natasha palette, I think, like whatsoever. And this was very expensive. I think I paid full price for this. I remember I ordered it off of Beautylish, and I either paid full price and got like $20 when it was like their rewards time, or I had $20 in rewards, so I paid maybe $109 for this. But still the most I had ever paid for an eyeshadow palette. And I just, sentimental because again, first Natasha palette that I ever purchased. But I really have created some looks with this throughout the years that I really enjoy. It's definitely not a most reached for palette at this point in time. In fact, this was in my these products will self-destruct, and I said I needed to reach for this either 20 or 25 times. I couldn't even get myself to do that. Like, couldn't even get myself to do that. Overall, I still feel like the shadows for the most part perform pretty well. I can tell some of them I like are getting a bit of hard pan, but I don't really notice issues when I use this on my eyes. Still, if I were to ever stop using this, I still do not see myself fully decluttering this out of my collection. And then I also have the Natasha Denona Gold palette as well. For this, I love the matte browns in this palette. Like, I love having this palette in my collection. This is another one that I feel like is a great companion palette to a more special indie brand eyeshadow palette, just because I love the matte browns in here. Yes, these are magnetic, like I could pull them out and put them into different palettes, but I feel like I get the most use out of them when these are just in this palette. I also really love the greens in here. Again, some of my first experiences with greens really made me fall in love with and love greens, but I do really like the golds in here as well. I just think this is a beautiful palette. I always talk about when this palette first was teased, I was like, who in their right mind would pay over $100 for this palette that has like these matte browns that all look the same? You can really tell in person how different the matte browns are, and they are like my perfect neutral matte browns. Probably my favorite matte browns in my entire collection. Even though I have the golden palette, I would never get rid of the gold, because this also has the greens in there that the golden doesn't, which I was a little disappointed the golden did not, but that's going nowhere. I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear that I don't feel like I could declutter ABH Jackie either. I have talked about this being a favorite palette in my collection for so many years. This is another one of my first loves of green was the shade Sponsored. I also have, I think Zam is probably my favorite shade in this palette at this point. It used to be Sponsored, but Zam is such a beautiful, flaky, chunky, punchy, just gorgeous, like rose gold, golden, just metallic. I love these warm brown mattes. Like, I really love those. I don't really love the pinks and purples in here, but I would never get rid of this palette. Once I use up like Zam, Soleil, some of these matte browns, and then Sponsored, I would consider decluttering at that time, because then everything that I love in this palette is like done for. But until then, I don't see myself getting rid of this. I have the Odin's Eye Merry Christmas and Christmas Eve palettes. First of all, I feel like these are really coveted palettes, like really coveted. I'm so glad that I got my hands on them. They were like very sought after, because I feel like they released and then sold out right away, and then they didn't come back for like another year. So here is Merry Christmas, and then I also have Christmas Eve. I feel like the quality in these palettes specifically are really good, but I've talked about how I think there's been a serious decline in the quality of Odin's Eye palettes. So I really enjoy these, and again, I feel like we're really sought after, so I don't think, unless you were to shop like secondhand, I don't think I could get my hands on these again, and I feel like they would be serious declutter regrets if I did that. I think the color stories are so fun. Again, not my most reached for palettes in my collection, but I do still really enjoy having these around. And because I feel like these were just, I don't want to even say like so limited, but because it was so hard to get your hands on these, like I just feel like these are kind of special palettes in my collection. So those I would not get rid of. The Sydney Grace Tiny Marvels eyeshadow palette. First of all, this was done in collaboration with Mel Thompson, which honestly, I was watching a Mel Thompson video the other day and then I had to turn it off because I was getting so sad. It's crazy to me to think that Mel has been gone for years. Like, and I also like, no, I can't even talk about it. Anyway, I also love the quality, love the color story. The shade Scarab is one of my favorite blue brown shades in my entire collection. I also love the way that Fire Butts, yes, layers over top of Scarab. I like that we have this beautiful pop of lavender. Lavender is one of my favorite colors, like just in general, lavender and periwinkle. So anytime there's a lavender, I just love it. And I specifically love a lavender matte. Even though it's not a shadow I reach for all that frequently, I love to have a couple lavenders in my collection. The outer packaging artwork is also just so stunning. So I would never declutter that. I actually have, okay, I have 3 Kaleidos palettes that I don't think I could ever find myself decluttering. So up first we have the Sashimi City, which is one of my top palettes in my collection since owning. I love this palette because it's very basic and very simple. You don't really have to think about this one. You're not going to get a ton of different looks with this. You don't have a lot of variety amongst the 7 shadows, but the shimmer shades in here are so sparkly on the lids. This is one of the palettes that I get the most compliments when wearing, like one of my most complimented palettes, and it's just so easy. It's just so easy. I absolutely love this palette. I would never declutter that. Okay, this one I can attest to feeling like I would never declutter it because I dropped this the other day. It shattered, and I had a moment where I thought to myself, should I just throw it away? Like, it was like eyeshadow everywhere. Like, I'm looking at this right now, there's probably spaghetti noodles repressed in here. Not really, so don't freak out too much. But, like, shattered all over. My daughter was so kind to help me pick it up a little bit. I went online to see if I could get it still at Kaleidos. You can't. I didn't necessarily look on, like, Poshmark or Mercari. But I was like, I guess we have to pick this up, repress it, and salvage it because I really love this palette. It's not my most used by any means, but one of my favorite, like, pink mauve looks to create is with these 3 shadows. I also like, I'm so glad that these two didn't shatter because I like to have these 2 grungy mattes in my collection. I just feel like they're a little bit unique, not something that I have really in other palettes. I am a little bit sad that Sun Gazer is what it is, but there's still some shadow there still for me to use. And then I don't really care about the mint shadows down here. That's not a real care for me. But I also remember when they teased this palette and I was just so excited about it. Like, so excited. Probably the most excited I had been for a palette launch in a long time. I remember actually being in Florida when I saw this tease and I knew immediately that I would be buying. I think it's a really unique palette in the packaging. I love the packaging. I wish Kaleidos would do fun palettes like this again, but I don't see myself ever decluttering that unless it like truly shattered again and it was like, there really is no saving it, but I would be devastated. And then I have my Kaleidos Escape Pod. Now, part of this is one of the first more colorful palettes that I purchased. And this is something that just like when I think of this palette, it makes me think of palettes where I started to play around with color, have a little bit more fun with my eyeshadow. But I believe this also launched in 2020. And this is like one of the palettes, I swear, that got me through the summer of 2020. Like, heat of COVID, like all just locked inside, feeling so depressed. This is like one of the palettes that just got me through. Like, I would go play with makeup in my room and it would make the world feel just a little bit better. So there's that. And then the other palette that really, like, I could never declutter this. First of all, it's so freaking cute. It is so cute. This was my first like colorful palette. I don't have anything like this in my collection. It's an all matte palette, 9 pans. The colors in here, they're so pretty, so cute. I don't feel like I literally don't feel like I have these colors in any other palettes. I absolutely love and adore this palette. I don't reach for it that frequently, but I will never declutter this palette. I love that so much. A couple other palettes I believe I got in 2020 that have like kind of sentimental value. We have the Nars Summer Solstice. This is the Nars palette that made me fall in love with Nars and feel like for a while I needed to buy every single Nars palette that launched. I don't do that anymore, but this was the palette that made me do it. I also wore this to my daughter's first grade graduation. I wore this so much when I first got this, and this is another one of those just like shining stars in a dark time. So I absolutely love this. I love the outer packaging too. And then I have the ColourPop Limoncello palette. I will say, I know Pan Left Behind did this earlier this year, and I was like, okay, it's not like the most punchy, most exciting palette still in my collection, but this, I remember getting this like the day that I left for a trip to South Dakota, brought this with me, and I just have fond memories of that trip, and just looking in this palette makes me happy with the like yellows and the blue. I really love this palette. I don't have a lot of ColourPop left. And again, it's not my most reached for palette, but there is something so sentimental and special about this palette. I could never get rid of that. Also, the Viseart Soleil Le Plage palette, I love. I was really not a fan of Viseart. Like I feel like was a hater of them kind of. But there was something about this color story that I had to have, and I now can appreciate Viseart for what it is. It is not going to be the most punchy, dramatic, intense eyeshadow, but it is really beautiful, more soft and a little bit sophisticated. So something that I really like reaching for on days that I'm going to work. I've also brought this palette traveling with me. We've got three more neutral browns, which these are like some perfect matte browns to have. Viseart is also a formula that is a little bit more buildable, which is really helpful for me from time to time. And then we have some yellows, which I love, and a pop of blue. So this palette just makes me happy. I really love this one. Won't be decluttering that. Okay, I could talk about any of my Denona Myricks eyeshadow palettes, but for sure, for honestly any of them, because they're all limited edition and I'd be so sad not to have them. But this is my first Denona Myricks eyeshadow palette. It's the Lightwork Volume 3. And I got this palette in 2022. Yes. 2023, 5, no, 2021? 2021. But then maybe didn't. Was it 2021? I remember some of my darkest moments in 2022 having this palette, like dark moments due to just all things dark moments, like so lost and just like literally feeling like we just got to get through. And just, I remember specifically like one day I was just out swatching this on my patio and just like looking at how beautiful this looked in the sunlight, and it's cheesy as it sounds, being like, okay, like this actually like made me smile today. And so there's a bit of that to it. I also just, this made me fall in love with Denona Myricks eyeshadows. I absolutely love this palette. I feel like this is one of the first palettes that really got me into blues. Like I remember really loving the shade Martian, and oh, just looking at that now, even like the shift in that is so unique. I don't think I'm gonna be able to catch it on camera, but I absolutely love this. I wouldn't shut up about this when this came into my life. Love this, could never declutter it. Then I have the Melt Gemini palette. I never reached for this, but this was such a hyped palette. I remember being so excited to get this palette, and just like being so excited about the grunginess of this, the greens, and just everyone talking about it. I was like, oh my god, I have the Melt Gemini palette. I am like a cool girl now. I have made it. I never reached for this though, but I could never declutter it. Honestly, like the outer packaging, like the artwork and stuff, I absolutely love. I live for it. I don't see myself ever decluttering this. I honestly don't know if I ever see myself reaching for this. Like I really, in my mind, love this palette, but then I never use it. So, but I won't declutter it. And then the 24th and final palette, I am gonna have to declutter this at some point, someday, but I will stretch this out as far as I possibly can. It is the Dose of Colors Friendcation palette. I remember buying this. I have worn this to just about every country concert since purchasing, which basically means, because country concerts, that's like my social life. This is like my actual going out palette. Like we're going to a country concert, I'm pulling out Dose of Colors Friendcation. I just love this palette. I'm actually shocked. So this shadow up here kind of cracked and broke, which makes me so sad because I had this when I wasn't into blues, and now this is broken and I love blues. So I would have loved to, you know, gotten a little bit more out of that shadow. This palette, I see hard pan. I see the hard pan here, although it still swatches fine. I also see the hard pan here. This palette, or this shadow right down here, has completely shattered and I've had to repress that in. I am absolutely shocked that I don't have pans in this palette. I have some pretty good dips going in the top 3 shadows up here. I just love this. Plus, like, the mattes in here I feel like are just like perfect mattes, more neutral and then a couple of warm mattes as well. I just absolutely love this palette. It will be a sad day when this actually does need to like just actually go. You can't get this anymore, obviously. Oh, it'll be a sad, sad day. But after that, you guys, that is going to wrap up and conclude today's video. Those are the 24 eyeshadow palettes that I personally do not believe I could ever declutter. I would love to know in the comments below, what palettes do you feel like you could never get rid of that sit in your collection? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.